Ludwig Otto Friedrich Wilhelm was born on August 25, 1845, at Nymphenburg Palace near Munich. He was the eldest son of Crown Prince Maximilian of Bavaria and Princess Marie of Prussia. His birth placed him within one of the oldest dynasties in Europe, the House of Wittelsbach, whose rule in Bavaria extended back for centuries. From the beginning, his life was framed by ceremony, lineage, and expectation. Yet the environment in which Ludwig grew up was not shaped solely by politics. It was also defined by imagination. His father, who would later reign as King Maximilian II, possessed intellectual interests and a certain romantic sensibility. He commissioned the reconstruction of Hohenschwangau Castle, located near the Alps, transforming medieval ruins into a revivalist residence filled with murals depicting Germanic legends. Scenes from the sagas of Lohengrin and Tannhäuser adorned the walls. The castle did not merely shelter the royal family, it presented a narrative world of knights, swans, and sacred quests. It was in this setting that Ludwig spent much of his childhood. Hohenschwangau stood amid mountains and lakes, removed from the administrative rhythms of Munich. The landscape was quiet and imposing. Forests surrounded the castle. The nearby Alpsee reflected the changing light of the seasons. For a sensitive child, such surroundings encouraged contemplation. Ludwig's early education took place within this atmosphere of romantic imagery and natural isolation. His tutors were instructed to provide him with a conventional royal education. He studied history, languages, religion, and the principles of governance. Bavaria in the mid-19th century was a constitutional monarchy. The king reigned, but power operated through ministers and parliamentary structures. Ludwig was therefore expected to understand statecraft and diplomacy. However, observers later remarked that his interests leaned less toward administration and more toward literature and theatre. He read extensively, especially works connected to German medieval mythology. He developed an intense fascination with heroic figures who existed in moral clarity and spiritual grandeur. The legends depicted at Hohenschwangau did not remain decorative images for him. They became emotional reference points. His relationship with his parents was formal rather than intimate. King Maximilian II valued discipline and intellectual seriousness. Ludwig grew up aware of expectations, but distant from warmth. His mother, Princess Marie, preferred outdoor pursuits and maintained her own circle of interests. Neither parent appears to have fully understood the depth of Ludwig's imaginative life. By adolescence, Ludwig had become notably tall and striking in appearance. Contemporary descriptions emphasize his height, pale complexion, and introspective expression. He spoke softly and often seemed withdrawn in public settings. While he fulfilled ceremonial duties as required, he showed little enthusiasm for court society. In 1861, when Ludwig was 16, he attended a performance of Richard Wagner's opera Lohengrin in Munich. The experience left a profound impression. Wagner's work drew directly from the same medieval sources that had surrounded Ludwig since childhood. The music, with its sweeping orchestration and mythic themes, seemed to animate the murals of Hohenschwangau. For Ludwig, the opera was not mere entertainment. It was confirmation that the imaginative world he cherished could exist with overwhelming emotional force. At this stage, however, his role remained that of a crown prince. Bavaria occupied a complex position within the German states. Prussia was rising in influence under Otto von Bismarck. Austria maintained its own claims to leadership among German territories. Bavaria, traditionally aligned with Austria, faced strategic uncertainties. These geopolitical realities formed the backdrop of Ludwig's education, even if they did not command his personal enthusiasm. His younger brother Otto, born in 1848, shared some aspects of his temperament, though their relationship would later be overshadowed by tragedy. Accounts from tutors suggest that Ludwig possessed strong memory and imagination, but lacked sustained interest in practical administration. He preferred solitude and long walks in the surrounding countryside. By the early 1860s, Europe was entering a period of tension. Nationalist movements and shifting alliances signaled that the balance of power was unstable. In March 1864, King Maximilian II fell ill unexpectedly. His condition deteriorated rapidly. On March 10th, he died at the age of 52. Ludwig was 18, only months away from his 19th birthday. The transition from prince to king occurred with abrupt finality. One day, he was a sheltered heir immersed in literature and music. The next, he was sovereign of a kingdom navigating uncertain European politics. Contemporary observers noted the shock visible on his face during the first public ceremonies following his father's death. He had been educated for kingship in theory. In practice, he had little direct experience with governance. His formative years had been spent not in ministerial councils, but within castles decorated with legends. As Ludwig prepared to assume full royal authority, those around him recognized both his intelligence and his fragility. The young king carried within him two inheritances. One was dynastic responsibility, grounded in centuries of Wittelsbach rule. The other was a deeply internalized vision of romantic heroism. When he ascended the throne in 1864, Europe did not yet know the extent to which his reign would diverge from conventional expectations. For Ludwig himself, the crown did not erase the imaginative world of his youth. It accompanied him. The castles of his childhood had taught him that kingship could be theatrical, symbolic, and transcendent. Reality would soon demand something different. The tension between those two understandings of power began at the moment of his accession. When Ludwig II ascended the Bavarian throne in March 1864, he was not yet 19 years old. The sudden death of King Maximilian II left the kingdom in the hands of a young monarch whose political experience was limited and whose temperament remained largely untested. Bavaria, though constitutionally structured, still relied upon the presence and judgment of its sovereign. Ministers advised, Parliament deliberated, but the king's authority retained symbolic and practical weight. Ludwig's first public appearances drew attention across Europe. His height, composed manner, and striking features made an immediate impression. Observers described him as dignified and serious beyond his years. In the early weeks of his reign, many Bavarians felt reassured. The monarchy appeared secure. The transition had been orderly. Yet behind the formal ceremonies lay uncertainty. Bavaria stood between powerful neighbors. Prussia, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, pursued a calculated strategy to consolidate German states under its influence. Austria sought to preserve its traditional role in German affairs. Bavaria's alignment would carry consequences. The young king inherited these diplomatic tensions at the moment of his accession. Ludwig approached his new responsibilities with a mixture of conscientiousness and inward reserve. He summoned Richard Wagner to Munich. Wagner, at that time, was both celebrated and controversial. For Ludwig, Wagner was not merely a composer. He represented the living embodiment of the mythic world that had shaped his imagination. The king wrote to Wagner with admiration and urgency. He offered financial support and invited him to reside in Bavaria. Wagner accepted. In May 1864, he arrived in Munich. The relationship between the young king and the composer developed rapidly. Ludwig attended rehearsals and discussions. He provided generous funding for Wagner's projects, including the completion of Tristan und Isolde and plans for future works. The king's enthusiasm was sincere and intense. For the first time, the visionary art that had inspired him as a prince was directly within his reach as a patron. However, this patronage had political consequences. Wagner's presence in Munich provoked opposition among ministers and members of the court. His personality was forceful. His financial demands were substantial. Conservative elements within Bavarian society viewed Wagner's influence with suspicion. Ludwig found himself confronted with a reality he had not fully anticipated. Royal patronage could not exist in isolation from public opinion or fiscal constraint. Despite warnings, Ludwig continued to support Wagner extensively throughout 1864. Yet ministers worried that the king's devotion risked undermining political stability. Reluctantly, Ludwig faced a difficult choice. In December 1865, under sustained political pressure, Wagner left Munich. Though the king continued to support him financially from a distance, the composer's direct presence at court ended. The episode revealed several defining characteristics of Ludwig's rule. First, his loyalty to personal conviction was unwavering. Second, he struggled to balance private passion with public responsibility. The structures of constitutional monarchy required negotiation and compromise. Ludwig's instincts leaned towards singular devotion rather than calculated adjustment. As 1865 drew to a close, the European political climate approached crisis. War between Austria and Prussia appeared increasingly likely. Bavaria would soon be compelled to choose sides in a conflict that would redefine the German world. Ludwig, still in his early 20s, stood at the intersection of history and imagination. The youthful sovereign who had summoned Wagner with unguarded admiration would now confront decisions of far greater consequence. The romantic prince had become a constitutional monarch. The adjustment was incomplete. The challenges ahead would test not only his authority, but his capacity to reconcile vision with reality. By 1866, the rivalry between Austria and Prussia had reached open confrontation. Tensions over leadership within the German Confederation culminated in war during the summer of that year. For Bavaria, the conflict posed a defining choice. Historically aligned with Austria, the kingdom now faced the military power of Prussia, whose modernized army and strategic planning had transformed the balance within Central Europe. King Ludwig II did not seek war. His temperament was not inclined toward military ambition, yet as sovereign, he could not avoid participation. Guided by his ministers and by long-standing diplomatic alignment, Bavaria entered the war on the side of Austria. The Austro-Prussian War lasted only 7 weeks. It was brief, but decisive. Prussia's victory at the Battle of Königgrätz in July 1866 effectively ended Austria's influence within German affairs. The defeat reverberated throughout the southern German states. For Ludwig, the war represented more than a political setback. It marked the beginning of a profound shift in his position as king. Bavaria was compelled to sign a peace treaty with Prussia. Though the kingdom retained formal independence, it entered into a defensive alliance that drew it into Prussia's sphere of influence. The reality of diminished autonomy became clear. The war exposed Ludwig to the constraints of power in a modernizing Europe. In the years that followed, Prussia continued its project of German unification under its own leadership. Otto von Bismarck maneuvered carefully, combining diplomacy with strategic force. Southern German states, including Bavaria, remained technically separate but increasingly integrated into Prussia's military framework. Ludwig withdrew further from active political life during this period. While he continued to fulfill constitutional responsibilities, his engagement with statecraft became more formal than passionate. Ministers handled daily governance. The king signed documents, received reports, and maintained appearances. Yet his emotional distance from political realities deepened. Meanwhile, his fascination with art and architecture intensified. If political sovereignty was constrained, aesthetic sovereignty remained within his control. In 1870, Europe once again moved toward conflict. Tensions between Prussia and France escalated into the Franco-Prussian War. This time, Bavaria, bound by its defensive alliance with Prussia, joined the northern German states against France. The war proceeded swiftly. Prussian-led forces achieved significant victories. By early 1871, French resistance had collapsed. In January of that year, a momentous ceremony took place at the Palace of Versailles. The German Empire was proclaimed, with King Wilhelm I of Prussia declared German Emperor. For Ludwig II, this development carried complex implications. Bavaria agreed to join the new empire, though it negotiated certain reserved rights. Nevertheless, the formation of the German Empire effectively ended Bavaria's full sovereignty. It was Ludwig who formally endorsed the imperial title for Wilhelm I, a gesture that facilitated the unification process. Correspondence suggests that he viewed the arrangement pragmatically rather than passionately. Financial considerations also played a role. Substantial funds from Prussia were directed toward Bavaria in connection with the agreement, easing fiscal pressures on the kingdom. The proclamation of the empire in 1871 marked the culmination of German unification under Prussian leadership. For Ludwig, it signaled the transformation of his kingship into a more ceremonial role within a larger political structure. The symbolic authority of the Bavarian crown remained intact, yet ultimate power now resided in Berlin. Decisions of war and foreign policy belonged to the imperial government. This reality contributed to Ludwig's increasing retreat from political engagement. Rather than assert influence within the imperial framework, he turned inward. Observers at the time began to note changes in his habits. He preferred nighttime activity, conducting meetings after dark and avoiding large gatherings. Invitations were declined, ceremonial duties were minimized, ministers adapted to a monarch who governed at a distance. The experience of war and unification had clarified the limits of his authority. If Bavaria could not define its destiny independently, Ludwig would shape a different domain, one of architecture, patronage, and imagination. Ludwig did not openly protest these transformations. Instead, he redirected his energy toward projects that expressed a different vision of kingship, one rooted not in political dominance but in cultural creation. The disillusionment that followed 1866 and 1871 did not manifest as rebellion. It manifested as withdrawal. The young monarch who had entered public life with artistic enthusiasm now presided over a kingdom integrated into a larger empire. His role had changed. His response would define the next phase of his reign. Political unification had been achieved through force and diplomacy. Ludwig would seek permanence elsewhere. Although Richard Wagner had left Munich in December 1865 under political pressure, his influence over King Ludwig II did not diminish. Physical distance altered the public controversy surrounding the composer, but it did not weaken the private bond between patron and artist. If anything, their relationship matured into a sustained collaboration conducted largely through correspondence and financial support. For Ludwig, Wagner represented more than a musician. He embodied an artistic universe that aligned with the king's inner world. Wagner's operas drew upon Germanic legend, medieval symbolism, and themes of redemption and transcendence. These were not merely aesthetic preferences for Ludwig. They reflected his understanding of what kingship might signify beyond administration and diplomacy. After Wagner's departure from Munich, Ludwig ensured that the composer's debts were settled. The king provided substantial funds, allowing Wagner to reside in Switzerland and later in Bayreuth. In doing so, Ludwig shielded the composer from immediate financial collapse. This sustained patronage had tangible consequences for European cultural history. Without Bavarian support, Wagner's later works might not have reached completion in the form known today. The monumental cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen, a sequence of 4 operas rooted in mythological narrative, required years of composition and staging. Ludwig's backing made such ambition possible. Within Bavaria, however, opinion remained divided. Critics viewed the king's generosity as excessive. Ludwig, for his part, did not perceive his actions as indulgent. He considered them an extension of royal responsibility. To him, patronage was not separate from governance. It elevated the identity of the kingdom. The culmination of this vision emerged in Bayreuth. Wagner proposed the construction of a dedicated festival theatre designed specifically for the performance of his operas. The concept departed from conventional court theatres. It aimed to create an immersive artistic environment. Ludwig agreed to support the project. Bavarian financial assistance proved decisive. The Bayreuth Festspielhaus opened in 1876 with the premiere of the complete Ring cycle. The event attracted visitors from across Europe, including composers, intellectuals, and aristocrats. The festival symbolized a form of cultural sovereignty that differed from political power. Bavaria, though integrated into the German Empire, asserted influence through artistic achievement. Ludwig's role in enabling Bayreuth secured his place in the history of music. Yet the personal dimension of the relationship remained complex. Ludwig's admiration for Wagner was intense and often idealized. Wagner, older and experienced, responded with gratitude but maintained practical awareness of his own needs. Over time, subtle distance developed between them. Wagner's marriage to Cosima and his immersion in Bayreuth reduced direct reliance on the king's presence. Ludwig continued to provide funds but interacted less frequently in person. By the late 1870s, the king's life grew increasingly secluded. Wagner died in February 1883 in Venice. The news reached Bavaria with solemn gravity. For Ludwig, the loss was profound. He had supported the composer for nearly 2 decades. Wagner's death marked the end of a relationship that had defined the cultural identity of his kingship. In public memory, the association between Ludwig and Wagner endured. Bayreuth remained a center of artistic pilgrimage. Ludwig's patronage became inseparable from Wagner's legacy. Politically, however, the king's influence did not expand. His withdrawal from active governance deepened during these years. Ministers handled state affairs with limited direct intervention from the monarch. The patronage of Wagner illustrates a central paradox of Ludwig's reign. In political matters, his authority diminished within the framework of a unified Germany. In cultural matters, his impact proved lasting and transformative. He did not shape the empire's policies. He shaped its artistic imagination. By 1883, with Wagner's death, one chapter of Ludwig's life closed. The king, who had once summoned a controversial composer to Munich, had become a figure increasingly removed from public visibility. His devotion to myth and beauty remained constant. But the world around him had grown more practical, more industrial, and more politically centralized. The patron had fulfilled his role. The answer to how he would define the remainder of his reign would not be found in parliament or diplomacy. It would rise instead in stone. By the early 1870s, King Ludwig II had begun to redirect his creative energy away from direct involvement in court life and toward architectural ambition. If music had once provided the emotional architecture of his reign, stone would now provide its physical form. The castles he commissioned during this decade were not conceived as mere residences. They were statements, carefully designed environments intended to embody an interior vision of kingship. The most famous of these projects, Neuschwanstein, began in 1869. Perched above the village of Hohenschwangau, Neuschwanstein rose against the alpine landscape with deliberate theatricality. Its towers and battlements evoked medieval fortresses, yet its design reflected 19th-century romanticism rather than historical accuracy. The location itself carried personal significance. From Neuschwanstein's windows, Ludwig could see Hohenschwangau, the site of his formative years. The new castle was not an escape from memory, but an extension of it. The interior rooms were planned with extraordinary attention to symbolic detail. The throne hall drew inspiration from Byzantine architecture, with a domed ceiling and elaborate mosaics depicting saints and rulers. Yet the throne itself was never installed. The space remained incomplete, suggesting an ideal rather than a functioning seat of power. Other chambers reflected Wagnerian themes. The Singers' Hall evoked the medieval Wartburg, central to the opera Tannhäuser. Murals throughout the castle depicted scenes from Lohengrin and other legends that had shaped Ludwig's imagination. The building was not designed for court gatherings or diplomatic receptions. It was intended for solitude. Construction progressed slowly and at considerable expense. Neuschwanstein was not Ludwig's only project. In 1874, work began on Linderhof Palace, located in a more secluded alpine valley. Unlike Neuschwanstein, Linderhof reached completion during Ludwig's lifetime. Smaller in scale, it combined elements of French Rococo design with theatrical fantasy. Linderhof contained artificial grottos, mirrored halls, and richly decorated chambers. One feature, an artificial cave illuminated by colored light, allowed the king to stage private performances of Wagner's music. Boats could glide across an indoor lake beneath painted skies. The environment blurred boundaries between nature, theatre, and architecture. A third major project emerged in 1878, Herrenchiemsee Palace, constructed on an island in Lake Chiemsee. Inspired directly by the Palace of Versailles, Herrenchiemsee represented Ludwig's homage to the French monarch Louis XIV. It stood as a symbolic tribute to absolute monarchy at a time when Ludwig's own authority had become largely ceremonial. The Hall of Mirrors at Herrenchiemsee echoed its French model in grandeur and proportion. However, the palace remained incomplete, and Ludwig spent only brief periods there. The financial implications of these projects were significant. Funding came primarily from the king's personal resources. Nevertheless, the scale of expenditure strained Bavarian finances. Loans accumulated, creditors pressed for repayment. Ministers grew increasingly concerned. Ludwig remained determined. He did not perceive his building campaigns as extravagance detached from responsibility. To him, they expressed continuity with historical monarchy. Yet the contrast between public governance and private construction widened. Ludwig preferred night travel to inspect building sites, often visiting Neuschwanstein after midnight to avoid public attention. Workers described him as courteous, yet distant. He examined architectural drawings in detail and requested revisions that reflected precise aesthetic preferences. His involvement in design was not superficial. As costs mounted, tensions within the government intensified. Ludwig resisted interventions. He believed that the legacy of his reign would be measured by enduring structures. The castles did not serve large households. Ludwig rarely entertained guests within them. They were spaces of retreat, inhabited by the king and a small number of attendants. Meals were sometimes taken alone. Court ceremony faded into minimal routine. By the late 1870s, Neuschwanstein remained unfinished. Herrenchiemsee expanded slowly amid financial strain. Observers began to question the sustainability of the king's projects. Newspapers discussed mounting debts. The tension between architectural ambition and fiscal reality grew increasingly difficult to ignore. In these years, Ludwig's castles came to represent both creative achievement and political vulnerability. The structures themselves were silent. Rising above forests and lakes, they reflected the alpine sky without commentary. Yet within their walls, the king sought permanence in a century defined by change. If unification had diminished Bavaria's sovereignty, stone offered continuity. The castles did not resolve the tensions of Ludwig's reign, they embodied them. By the close of the 1870s, the outlines of his legacy had taken shape against the mountains. By the late 1870s, King Ludwig II's withdrawal from conventional royal life had become unmistakable. The architectural projects continued, but the rhythm of his daily existence shifted decisively toward solitude. Public appearances grew infrequent. Court ceremonies were reduced to the minimum. The king, who had once stood before crowds as a youthful sovereign, now preferred darkness to daylight. Ludwig gradually reversed the natural order of his schedule. He remained awake through the night and slept during the day. Administrative documents were delivered in the evening. Ministers, if granted audience, often met him after midnight. Candles illuminated halls designed for theatrical effect rather than governance. Night provided more than privacy. It allowed control. Under darkness, travel could occur without public scrutiny. Ludwig frequently journeyed between Linderhof, Neuschwanstein, and other residences in covered carriages, minimizing contact with townspeople. He dismissed large entourages and preferred a limited circle of attendants. The court adapted to these changes. Servants adjusted their schedules. Messengers learned to operate within unusual hours. The shift reinforced distance between king and society. Bavaria possessed a constitutional framework in which ministers managed practical affairs, but the symbolic presence of the monarch still carried importance. Ludwig's physical absence gradually altered that balance. Engagement became procedural. Decisions were processed through paperwork rather than conversation. Within his private spaces, Ludwig cultivated environments shaped by theatrical design. At Linderhof, artificial grottos were illuminated with colored light. Music, often Wagnerian, accompanied solitary reflection. These settings were not constructed for spectacle before audiences. They were experienced largely alone. Observers later debated the meaning of this isolation. Some interpreted it as evidence of mental instability. Ludwig increasingly avoided social interaction. Even family contact became limited. His brother Otto, whose own mental health would deteriorate severely in subsequent years, was largely removed from public life. The Wittelsbach dynasty faced internal strain, though these matters remained discreet. Financial pressure intensified during this period. The costs of castle construction accumulated steadily. Loans were secured through private channels. Creditors grew concerned about repayment schedules. Ministers attempted to introduce financial restraint. Ludwig responded by seeking additional resources. Communication often occurred through written notes delivered by intermediaries. Face-to-face discussion became rare. The physical and psychological distance between monarch and cabinet widened gradually, rather than abruptly. Reports from attendants describe a man courteous, yet increasingly inward. He exhibited detachment. Conversations frequently returned to themes of medieval chivalry and divine kingship. His reading expanded to include historical accounts of absolute monarchs, particularly Louis XIV of France. Herrenchiemsee Palace reflected this fascination. Yet Ludwig's circumstances differed profoundly. Bavaria existed within a framework that constrained personal rule. Travel beyond Bavaria became rare. The king's world contracted to a series of controlled environments: mountain roads, secluded valleys, island palaces. Each location offered insulation from the administrative center of Munich. Within government circles, concern evolved from curiosity to anxiety. The combination of financial debt and royal seclusion posed practical difficulties. Legitimacy depended upon his formal approval. By the early 1880s, Ludwig's pattern of nocturnal living was firmly established. The king's isolation did not equate to idleness. Architectural planning continued. He involved himself in aesthetic decisions with sustained concentration. Yet this focus coexisted with increasing disengagement from the civic life of his kingdom. Separated from ordinary governance, he inhabited carefully curated solitude. By the mid-1880s, the tension between royal isolation and governmental responsibility approached a critical threshold. Ministers would soon confront a question that had gradually formed over years. How long could a constitutional monarchy operate when its sovereign withdrew almost entirely from public life? The answer would emerge not in music or stone, but in formal declaration. By the early 1880s, Bavaria functioned with increasing efficiency at the administrative level, yet with diminishing direct involvement from its sovereign. King Ludwig II remained the formal head of state, but the daily conduct of governance had shifted almost entirely into the hands of ministers. Documents requiring royal approval were transmitted to the king's residences, often at night. They were returned signed, sometimes accompanied by brief annotations. Ludwig's physical absence became more pronounced after 1883. Architectural projects remained central to his attention, and financial obligations associated with them intensified. The costs of Neuschwanstein, Herrenchiemsee, and Linderhof exceeded original projections. Financial institutions began pressing the government for clarity. Ministers confronted a dilemma. Bavaria's fiscal stability required intervention. The situation became more complicated when consideration turned toward the broader context of the Wittelsbach dynasty. Ludwig's younger brother Otto had exhibited signs of severe mental disturbance and lived in seclusion under medical supervision. The prospect of succession therefore offered little reassurance. By 1885, financial pressure reached a critical point. Debts approached levels that alarmed both private lenders and government officials. Within this climate, discussion shifted to constitutional remedy. If the king were deemed incapable of fulfilling his duties, provisions existed for regency. In early 1886, a group of physicians, led by Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, was assembled to evaluate the king's mental state. Notably, the commission conducted its assessment without personal examination of Ludwig, relying instead on testimonies and documented behavior. The medical report declared that the king suffered from a form of mental illness, rendering him incapable of ruling. On June 10, 1886, the Bavarian government formally declared Ludwig incapacitated and appointed his uncle, Prince Luitpold, as regent. The news came as a shock to many citizens. The declaration reframed years of eccentricity as pathology. At Neuschwanstein, officials prepared to enforce the decision. On the night of June 10th, a delegation attempted to present the decree. The king reportedly refused to accept it, declaring the action illegal. The confrontation did not escalate into violence, but it exposed the gravity of the situation. 2 days later, a second commission arrived with greater preparation. Ludwig was taken into custody and transported to Berg Palace, situated on the shores of Lake Starnberg. The removal occurred without public spectacle, yet rumors spread rapidly across Bavaria. The transition to regency altered the structure of government formally rather than practically. Ministers continued their functions under Prince Luitpold's authority. For Ludwig, the change was absolute. The decision to depose him rested upon the intersection of financial anxiety, political stability, and medical judgment. By mid-June 1886, the king, who had retreated into architectural solitude, now found himself confined under supervision. The structures he built stood unfinished in the mountains. The political structure he inherited continued without him. The question that remained concerned not only his removal, but the circumstances that would follow. Within days, events at Lake Starnberg would transform controversy into enduring mystery. The youthful sovereign of vision was now a prisoner of reality. His story was about to reach its final, unexplained conclusion. On June 10, 1886, the Bavarian government publicly proclaimed that King Ludwig II was no longer capable of ruling. Executive authority passed to Prince Luitpold as regent. The decision marked an extraordinary moment in Bavarian constitutional history. Never before had a reigning monarch of the Wittelsbach dynasty been removed from active power in such a manner. At Neuschwanstein Castle, Ludwig initially rejected the decree as unlawful. He attempted to rally support among loyal officials and local authorities. Messages were dispatched to Munich, asserting that he remained the legitimate sovereign. For a brief moment, uncertainty prevailed. Yet the administrative machinery of the state had already shifted. Ministers, civil servants, and military leaders recognized the regency. The transfer of authority proceeded swiftly and without open conflict. In the early hours of June 12th, a commission arrived at Neuschwanstein to escort the king into custody. Dr. Bernhard von Gudden accompanied the delegation. Ludwig was informed that he would be taken to Berg Palace on Lake Starnberg, where he would reside under medical supervision. Accounts suggest that he submitted without physical resistance, though he maintained his protest against the legality of the action. The journey from Neuschwanstein to Berg unfolded quietly. The mountain roads that had so often carried the king during nocturnal travel now bore him away from the castles he had built. There were no crowds gathered along the route, no ceremonial farewell. The removal was administrative rather than dramatic. Berg Palace provided isolation without grandeur. Upon arrival, Ludwig's circumstances changed markedly. Though treated with formal respect, he was under supervision. Communication was limited. Guards were stationed discreetly. Ludwig appeared calm during his first day at Berg. He walked within the grounds and conversed with Dr. von Gudden. His demeanor, as described by some attendants, was composed and reflective. Public reaction across Bavaria unfolded with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Many citizens had regarded Ludwig as distant, but not incapacitated. On June 13, 1886, events took an unexpected turn. That evening, Ludwig requested permission to walk along the lakeshore. Dr. von Gudden accompanied him. They departed the palace shortly after 6:30 p.m. Weather conditions were unsettled. Reports mention rain and gathering darkness. When they failed to return by nightfall, concern arose. Search parties were organized. At approximately 11:30 p.m., the bodies were discovered in the shallow waters. The official statement concluded that the king had taken his own life by drowning, and that Dr. von Gudden had died while attempting to prevent him. The shallow water prompted immediate questions. The sudden deaths transformed a political controversy into enduring mystery. Speculation spread rapidly. Some suggested suicide born of despair. Others proposed accidental drowning or intervention. The Bavarian government moved quickly to stabilize public perception. Ludwig's body was transported to Munich, where funeral rites were conducted with royal solemnity. Crowds gathered in large numbers, reflecting complex emotions of grief, loyalty, and uncertainty. The label Mad King began to circulate more widely, yet among many Bavarians, affection for Ludwig persisted. His withdrawal from public life had not erased the symbolic bond between monarch and people. At the time of his death, his castles remained incomplete. The events of June 1886 left unresolved questions. The psychiatric diagnosis and the circumstances at Lake Starnberg would remain subjects of historical debate. What could not be disputed was the abrupt end of a reign that had unfolded in tension between imagination and governance. The image of the solitary king, walking beside the dark waters of Lake Starnberg, entered European memory. His death sealed that narrative with ambiguity. The castles remained, the questions endured. With Ludwig II's death in June 1886, Bavaria entered a period of administrative stability. Yet Ludwig's story did not conclude with his removal from power. In many respects, it had only begun. The castles he left behind, Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee, became the foundation of his posthumous identity. Shortly after his death, the Bavarian state opened the royal residences to the public. This decision aimed to generate revenue. What followed was unexpected. Public fascination intensified. Visitors arrived in increasing numbers to witness the architectural fantasies that had once drawn criticism. Neuschwanstein quickly became a symbol not of fiscal excess, but of visionary grandeur. What had been described as extravagance began to be interpreted as artistry. Public memory proved more generous than political judgment. Ludwig's reputation underwent gradual recalibration. The epithet "Mad King" began to appear reductive. Historians and psychiatrists revisited the 1886 medical report. Modern analyses have questioned whether Ludwig's behavior met criteria for psychosis. Many of his traits may reflect personality characteristics rather than severe mental illness. Thus, the diagnosis that justified his deposition remains historically contested. Neuschwanstein evolved into one of the most recognizable structures in the world. Its vertical towers and dramatic setting established a visual archetype for the fairy tale castle. Yet its significance extends beyond aesthetic replication. It represents the culmination of 19th century Romanticism. Behind its historicist facade lay advanced infrastructure, central heating, running water, and modern kitchen systems. It was simultaneously nostalgic and technologically progressive. Herrenchiemsee reveals dynastic emulation, a homage to Versailles. Linderhof remains the most personal of his residences, designed for reflection. Collectively, these structures transformed Ludwig from controversial ruler into enduring cultural icon. Ironically, the financial strain that once justified political intervention later evolved into economic asset. The castles generate substantial tourism revenue and constitute central pillars of Bavarian identity. Culturally, Ludwig embodies the tension between governance and imagination. His sustained support of Richard Wagner altered the trajectory of European opera. Without Ludwig's financial backing, the Bayreuth Festival might not have materialized. His cultural investments produced long-term influence, disproportionate to his political effectiveness. The circumstances of his death continue to provoke inquiry. No conclusive evidence has resolved the mystery. What endures is ambiguity, an element that reinforces the mythic dimension of Ludwig's life. Mystery strengthens legacy. Over time, Ludwig's identity shifted from sovereign to symbol. He became emblematic of artistic devotion and romantic isolation. Interpretations vary: tragic visionary, irresponsible ruler, misunderstood aesthete. Each perspective reflects broader questions about the nature of leadership. Was Ludwig unfit to rule, or was he a monarch misaligned with his historical moment? 19th century Europe was defined by industrialization and bureaucracy. Ludwig's inward turn toward myth positioned him outside that trajectory. He governed symbolically rather than administratively. In an era demanding realpolitik, he offered romantic idealism. History judged him harshly in the short term. Posterity proved more ambivalent. King Ludwig II of Bavaria occupies a unique position in history. His reign demonstrates the limits of personal monarchy and the fiscal consequences of aesthetic absolutism. Yet it also reveals how cultural imagination can transcend political failure. Ludwig's life ended in uncertainty. His architectural creations, however, achieved permanence. He was a ruler whose aspirations exceeded his time. His story endures because it sits at the intersection of power, imagination, and enigma.